Oh, that's, I know it's late in the summer, but you gotta do better than that. Good morning. There you go. So I am Lisa Walker. I am your first presenter here today. And I'm going to be talking about the Graduate Research Fellowship Program at the National Science Foundation. Much of what I talk about, though, will be applicable to other kinds of fellowships you might apply for if you're interested in graduate education. So if you have particular questions, I'm going to leave plenty of time for Q&A at the end. So feel free to ask those questions, even if they're about other kinds of programs maybe you come across. So just a little background on me. My current role is Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education and Dean of University College, which means I really focus on student success. The Office of Undergraduate Research is one part of our office, larger office, that works on trying to provide programs for students to help them be as successful as they possibly can while they are students here, and to prepare them best for whatever comes next. For many of you, that might be graduate education, but it also, we're trying to present you with and provide you with this opportunities to develop the skills that will help you be successful in whatever comes next for you. So it may seem a little strange that the Associate Provost for Undergraduate Education is talking about graduate research fellowships, but I am a research faculty member. I have had, I think 6, 7, something like that, grants from the National Science Foundation for my own research. And I am a professor of sociology. And I have been here at UNC Charlotte for 25 years, and I have served as a reviewer, and I'll tell you a little bit about what that means, for the National Science Foundation, particularly for the Graduate Research Fellowship Program for many, many, many years. So I have a pretty good understanding of what the program is about and what it's looking for. So these slides I'm going to be showing you today are actually publicly available slides made by a nonprofit organization that works very closely with the National Science Foundation. So if you just Google NSF GRFP slides, these will come up. That's literally how I found them yesterday. So, and they update them every year with the most current information. So, and that's also the case again for many different kinds of fellowship programs. There is lots of publicly available information for almost all of the programs you might need. All right, so I'm going to get started. But if you have sort of a pressing question, like something I said doesn't make sense, or you don't understand what the slide's telling you, feel free to jump in, raise your hand while I'm talking. But as I said, we'll also have lots of time for Q&A at the end. So how do I advance the slides? This is on your laptop. It's use the big keyboard. Okay. Perfect. Okay. So just to give you a little overview of what I'm going to talk about, I'll give you some general information, describe the actual program and what it means to have a fellowship, talk about who's eligible and not eligible, and then talk about what the actual application process looks like, and then talk about, once you've applied, what the criteria are that reviewers will use to help you figure them out. So the Graduate Research Fellowship Program is part of the Division of Graduate Education at the National Science Foundation, and in particular is focused on STEM education. But STEM is a broader description at the National Science Foundation than you might think. So we'll get into what fields are covered in just a few minutes. Okay, so I like their infographics apparently. So we have this here, which gives you a little bit of background. The program has been around since 1952. To date, in the last 70 or so years, they've given over 70,000 of these fellowships. 40 of the fellows, or more than 40, have gone on to become Nobel laureates, which is a cool statistic, although I don't know what that means. Right now, the annual stipend for the fellowship is $37,000. It is a 3-year fellowship. In addition, you get an allowance of $12,000, which goes to the institution at which you were enrolled. And exactly how that educational allowance is used varies quite a bit. Most universities will use it to cover the costs of your tuition and often your fees, sometimes books. If that is more than the cost of education, sometimes they will give you the additional funds for things like travel to conferences and so forth. It is a 3-year fellowship, as I said, meaning 3 years of support, but it's a very flexible program in which it allows you up to 5 years to use that 3 years of funding. So if you get into a graduate program, you use 2 years of funding, and then you get a great opportunity to work, say, on a faculty member's funded research project, and you really want to do it, you can pause your NSF fellowship funding for a year or two, take that other opportunity, and then come back and use your final year of funding. So it's very flexible. It may also be the case, many institutions have sort of standard first-year packages where they want you to participate in their activities, assistantships of various kinds, so you can receive the fellowship and then pause it immediately and not take the funding in the first year and then start the following year, whatever it might be. You have up to 5 years to use your 3 years funding. The competition runs annually, and we get lots and lots of applications. Usually last year it was over 12,000 applications, and just over 2,000 fellowships were awarded. So it's fairly competitive, but it is not nearly as competitive as getting a big grant might be later in your career. It's a really good opportunity to get that process started for yourself. And those come from all kinds of institutions. So they don't just come from the biggest research institutions, because students who are seniors in undergraduate institutions of all kinds can apply to then use this money as graduate students. And I'll talk a little bit about the timing of when you might apply. It is only open to students who are pursuing graduate degrees, and that's both masters and PhDs in research programs, meaning research has to be a component of the work you're going to be doing. That's what the National Science Foundation pays for. If the website where you can find all this information, this is the nonprofit website, not the official NSF website, is nsfgrfp.org. Pretty easy. That's where you can find these slides. They also there have some really helpful tools as you're preparing your application, like a checklist and those kinds of things as well. Now, eligible fields of study. This is the one question I get a lot, because it's not everything that you're going to do, even if it is research-based. It has to fall into the category of fields that the National Science Foundation already funds. So that's chemistry, life sciences, so biological sciences primarily, psychology, computer information sciences, and computer engineering, but not all forms of engineering are here, but other kinds of engineering. That's one of the tricky spaces we can talk about if anybody's interested. Geosciences, math, physics, astronomy, social sciences, which include sociology, physical anthropology, political science, including some variations of political science like law and society. It also includes interdisciplinary social science programs. So, for example, here at UNC Charlotte, we have an organizational science program, and some of those students have been funded through this fellowship. It doesn't include education generally, unless you are specifically interested in STEM education, which then is eligible. Okay, so again, we can talk about some of those specifics either in the Q&A or one-on-one if you'd like, but those are generally the fields that are covered. You will see what's missing here primarily is humanities, right? So if you're going to graduate school in history, even if it is a research degree, that will not be something eligible for this particular fellowship program. Okay. So let me I've given you a little bit of the background, but I'll kind of reiterate some of the key points. As I said, it's 3 years. You get a $37,000 stipend. It goes to your institution, and then they are required to provide you that entire amount as payment to you. Okay, so that depending on whether you're enrolled in summer school, exactly how it gets dispersed might look different, but that entire $37,000 per year will come to you to support your living expenses while you were in graduate school. Again, the $12,000 educational allowance, which goes to the institution, which is done instead of sort of paying tuition and fees exactly at each institution. They just do a flat $12,000 amount, and that amount is used to cover as much of your expenses as it possibly can, your direct expenses. There are other NSF opportunities other than the fellowship. They do have an internship program. They have a particular fellowship program for students with disabilities. And then they have what's called the Career Life Balance program, which is if you are already on NSF funding of any kind, including the fellowship, and you have some family emergency or life circumstance that requires you to take a leave, you can actually apply for some additional funding to cover your time on leave. So once you're in the NSF family, it's really a nice place to be because they're very supportive. So as I said, it's a fellowship, meaning it's paid to you as an individual. It is not a research grant. It is not supporting your research expenses. It is a payment to you to cover your living expenses. Okay. Now, how far $37,000 goes varies a lot. Although it seems like so much money to me. It was 1,000 years ago when I myself had one of these fellowships, and the stipend at that point, this is in the mid-90s, was $14,400. Which was still a little bit more than the other graduate students were making, so it was nice, but 37 is a pretty good stipend these days. It's fairly competitive. Again, depending on your field, that may be a little bit more or possibly even a little bit less than what your classmates or colleagues are making, but it will go directly to you, and it does not carry a service obligation, right? So if you get a teaching assistantship, that means you have to be a TA or teach a course or whatever, you know, is appropriate in your discipline. This does not have any obligation tied to it. Your only obligation is to be a full-time graduate student while you are receiving the fellowship. Okay. As I said, it is flexible. It is an award to you. It is paid through your institution because you have to be an enrolled student to receive the funds, but it is something you can take with you. So if you get a fellowship coming out of your undergraduate career, you start a master's program, you do 2 years at a master's program, decide to go somewhere else for your PhD, you can take the money with you from one institution to another. Okay? It is, as I said, unrestricted. There is no service requirement either during or following the fellowship. There are other fellowships out there that have a service component either during or following the program. This is not one of them. And as I said, it's portable. You can take it where you want to go. And you have the 5 years to use the 3 years worth of funding. So just a little background in terms of how many we get. Again, it's last 5 years, it's been between 12 and 13,000 applications with a 16 to 17% success rate. So, you know, just over 2,000 fellowships awarded in each of those years. Okay. So again, that feels like, oh, 1 in 6 chance. That's not so great, but it's actually pretty good for these kinds of programs in terms of likelihood of success. And you can apply more than once, which I'll get to in just a second, which will increase your chances of being successful. So the goal of this program, the goal of the National Science Foundation is to support, I'm supposed to stay close to the microphone, is to support the future of science in this country. So the regular NSF programs, which provide research grants, which many of you may be at least connected to in the work you're doing this summer, are for research projects, right? So a scientist will submit a description of here's a project I want to do, here's how much it's going to cost, and the NSF says yes or no, and gives them some money. Sometimes they say yes, but not that much money, but that's another issue. And so basically, the goal of the National Science Foundation is to support the future of science. This program in particular is to support future scientists. So the whole evaluation of your application is about your potential to make contributions to the particular field of science you are pursuing, right? So the reviewers, who are the sort of experts, other scientists who get signed up to participate in the review process, are looking for evidence of your potential. Now, sometimes that comes in the form of previous success. Sometimes it comes in the form of your ability to describe the work you want to do and how it will advance the field you're interested in. Okay, and both of those are pieces of the application process. It's both, I think, from the applicant side and from the reviewer side, there's a little bit of the idea that what you need to show is that you understand what you're getting into, right? And that you know what the particular field you're interested in is all about and how you might be able to contribute in some way, right? If you don't have to promise that you're going to revolutionize your field, right? Because generally speaking, science works in small increments, right? And so being able to say, here's a place I think I could advance our understanding really is what the reviewers are going to be looking for. And so we're looking for this potential, right? And that the NSF wants to support people with this potential early in their careers to make sure they stick with it, right? The idea is we want to make sure sort of the best and the brightest upcoming scientists get the support they need to make it to the point where they really are advancing their field. They really are contributing to knowledge. They really are improving our society in one way or another. And the second goal, which is equally important, is that the program is designed to help broaden participation, right? So it's really about making sure that those folks who otherwise might not get a lot of support for their graduate education are getting that support. Folks who have the potential, but who really will help serve to broaden the descriptions of who is involved in science, who is a scientist, right? So that's another piece of the evaluation process. Okay, so again, eligibility. We've talked a little bit about the fields, which I'll talk about more in just a second, but I want to get through sort of the main eligibility criteria. For some of you, this may mean, this one's not for me. So most important thing is that it is for U.S. nationals, U.S. citizens, nationals, and permanent residents. So you should know if that's you or not. It is for early career scientists, which is defined here as you can apply in your senior year as an undergraduate or early in your graduate career. Okay. You can't apply in your 5th year as a graduate student, except under very, very unusual circumstances. But you can apply as an undergraduate student and then again as a first-year graduate student. So as I said, you have the opportunity to apply more than once. You often learn a lot by the first application, even if it is not a successful application. It can be very beneficial to helping you see what is it that I didn't quite do right. The reviewers take very seriously providing feedback for you so that you can improve your application should you apply a second time. Again, pursuing a research-based graduate program, either master's or PhD in one of the science fields identified by NSF, so a STEM field, or again, the one education field that's allowed is STEM education. You have to be full-time student, I think I've already said that once, in the program, and it has to be at an accredited university, and an accredited nonprofit university. You cannot be studying at a foreign institution. So again, you have to be a US citizen, national or permanent resident, and you have to be studying at an accredited US based institution. Now, there are, the applications are kind of bucketed into 4 categories or 4 levels. I don't like the word level because it makes it seem like one's higher than another, but 4 categories. The first is you are a senior undergraduate student and you have completed no graduate study to date, right? So you were finishing up your undergraduate career with the intention of beginning graduate study in the next year or 2. If the level 2 or category 2 is as a first-year graduate student, right? So, you know, as I said, the applications usually due in November. So in the very first semester you're in graduate school, you can apply as well. If you're in a joint bachelor's master's program, you have to have completed no fewer than 3 years of that joint program when you apply. Because then you've already got a little graduate study while you're still doing your undergraduate. Level 3 is second year graduate students, where you've got 1 year completed, no more than 1 year, and you're beginning your second year. Okay. Now, you can apply more than once, but the caveat is you can only apply in your first year graduate school or your second year graduate school. Whether you apply here or not, you can apply in one of these 2. So you could do level 1 and level 2 in subsequent years, level 1 and level 3, but you can't do level 2 and level 3. Level 4 is a sort of special category. This is for students who have completed more graduate study, but have had either some sort of interruption in their study or who are changing fields entirely, but having never completed their first graduate degree. Okay, so if you do 2 years of get a master's degree in something and then leave, and then want to come back and study a completely different field, you can apply as a level 4. Okay. And again, level 4 is not restricted. If you've applied before, you can apply again. You can't have completed a doctorate, however. If you've completed a master's degree, you can still jump in that category, but not if you've already completed a doctorate. Okay. This is though for people looking to restart their graduate career. So if you've done that first thing and then you take a break and then you start again, once you've started, you can't apply anymore. So you have to be trying to restart, right? And that's level 4. There are very few in that category usually. Okay. So again, degree programs and areas are one of the big questions here. So professional degrees are not eligible. Medical degrees and joint degrees with medical degrees or law degrees are not eligible. Applied programs like public health are not eligible. As I said, education except for STEM, history is not eligible unless it's the history of science. So very particular on these that it has to be science related, even though the degree program is not a science program. Okay. Now, the GRFP solicitation you would find at the official NSF GRFP website, not the .org one I mentioned before, but the nsf.gov site. And you can look that lists out pretty much every kind of program there is and tells you if it's eligible or not. These are sort of the big buckets of things that are not eligible. All right. Related to this, there are some, even within the science fields, some areas of study that are not eligible. Epidemiology is probably the one that I come across the most, where it seems like it should be covered and it's not, and I don't really know why, just sharing their rules with you. Really, if it's directly health related, right? So if it's about disease, even if it's about understanding disease, but certainly about treating disease, those are kinds of study that the federal government expects you to go to the National Institutes of Health to get support instead of NSF, right? That's just sort of, they've just sort of divided the line and said, if it's health related, disease related, it goes to NIH, okay? And if it's other kinds of biological science or health sciences, it comes to NSF. Again, the details are on the website if you have specific questions, but by and large, anything clinical or disease related is not going to be eligible for the NSF program. There's a couple of other weird ones, food safety, I don't know why. Okay, anyway, but the basic idea is if it's something that the National Science Foundation routinely supports, then you're eligible for the fellowship. It's just some of those are not as clear as you might think. All right, so what do you have to do? What's in the application package? The first is obviously just sort of your background information. It's who you are, what your educational background is, what kind of related work experience you've had. It's sort of like a mini resume, right? Any awards you've won, any publications or presentations you have, which would include a presentation at a poster session, like research conference, right? So it's a form you have to fill out. It's not something that you have to prepare sort of, separately. You just kind of fill in each of these sections on the application form online. But it's helpful if you've updated your resume recently, because you can kind of copy and paste more effectively than trying to remember everything. Second thing is what's called the personal statement. Generally, although the official name, I guess, is personal relevant background and future goals statement. This is a 3-page statement in which you need to sort of talk about how you've come to the place where this is what you want to study and how you're prepared to do it. Right? So say I did a summer research program and I worked in this person's lab and I learned about these things, and here's what we did there, and here's the role I played, and here's what came out of it, and now here's what I think is coming next for me as a scientist. Okay. Now, I said the words as a scientist very particularly because that's what they care about. You as a scientist. They are funding you as a scientist. This is not, a little bit of personal background, if it's relevant, is fine, but this is not like a 3-page autobiography of, I was born in this place and then we moved here. Now, if it's directly relevant to what you're studying, that's fine, right? And sometimes it helps to have a personal connection to the field you're studying. But by and large, this is called a personal statement, but it's really a person as a scientist statement, right? Third thing you have to do is then a graduate research statement. Now, this is the part that I think sometimes causes confusion. This is basically like a mini 2-page research proposal. But, as I said, the NSF is funding you as a future scientist, not your actual project. No one will care if you never do the project that you describe in your graduate research statement. What it is a demonstration that you understand what a good research project looks like and can describe it in a way that communicates to the reviewers. Now, your reviewers will be in your field or an adjacent field, but they won't be in your specific subfield. So when you apply for a big NSF grant, the reviewers will have very specific knowledge of the work you're doing. That is not the case for the fellowship. right? So the I review in the category of social and geographical science, which contains a lot of things, right? I'm a sociologist. Some of the proposals are sociologists. Many of them are from geography, or some of them are from political science. And I need to be able to understand the research that the person is describing. So it has to be for not like your grandmother has to understand it, right? And if any of your grandmothers are scientists, I apologize, but it's really about, you know, making sure that you can demonstrate you understand what it means to do research. Okay, this is one of the key places where your potential as a future scientist is evaluated. Okay. Does that kind of make sense to everybody? I'm seeing some. Okay. It is very, very challenging to do that effectively in 2 pages. I struggle. I mean, I have to write 2-page descriptions of my work sometimes, and it's very difficult, right? That includes references, by the way. It's 2 pages, like it has to fit on 2 pages. You upload a PDF, it has to be 2 pages. Now there are guidelines about font size, thankfully, because I'm old and my eyes are not good. So I got one that was in 8-point font, I'd probably lose my mind, right? But you can squeeze a lot on it. The references can be an 8-point font down at the bottom, that's okay. But it is a challenge. And so what I would say right now, before I talk about the rest of this, is for both the personal statement and the research statement, you're going to need to spend some time revising, crafting, getting feedback, right? This is not something you can write the night before and think that you're going to be able to accomplish it. These are challenging to write. Okay, the research statement, especially because it's only 2 pages, and that's probably the most important piece of the whole package. Okay. I will say my favorite of all time was we had an applicant who spent the 2 pages telling us why they wanted to be a sociologist so that they could be like Indiana Jones. And it took me a while to figure out what the heck were they were talking about. And I kind of got it eventually, but it was not a very compelling statement, but didn't really demonstrate a good understanding of what it would mean to be a social scientist, right? So Indiana Jones, not a good example. But I really can't iterate enough how important it is to get people to look at that. Now, having said that, any of you want to send me a draft of your research statement or your personal statement, I am happy to look at it for you. I'm easy to find. I'm lisa.walker@charlotte.edu. Right, super easy. But also the graduate school here does often in the fall, you know, sometime in September, October, have like pizza night, bring your statement, do a round robin with some faculty who are there to help you improve them. That you'll see that in the Niner Insider usually. And it's really about, you know, getting you some faculty expertise. Obviously, the folks you're working with this summer are good places to get some feedback as well. But I also would say, you know, get some peer feedback, because often faculty, especially faculty who maybe don't have as much experience with this particular program, will allow your research statement to stay very technical and insider. And what you need is a little bit more of a broad explanation of what you're doing and why it will matter to science. Other things you need to include in your application package are transcripts. Obviously, that's pretty straightforward. That is a required piece of this. It varies from year to year whether it has to be an official transcript or if you can send it just an unofficial transcript. So you'll need to check that. If it has to be an official transcript, make sure that usually takes a couple of weeks for you to receive it, so you can give yourself time. Finally, letters of reference. You are required to have 3 letters of reference. You can have up to 5. I'm not really sure that generally speaking, the fourth and fifth ones help that much. However, probably doesn't hurt if you feel like you have letter writers who would be able to really speak to your personal potential. Because, every once in a while somebody forgets or doesn't have a lot of time and kind of doesn't do as great of a job. So having an extra letter doesn't hurt. I would say probably best to err on the side of at least one extra. I don't know that the fifth one is terribly helpful. Right? The important thing with letter writers, the important thing with letter writers is that really you need to make sure they understand that this is a fellowship program in which you are being judged as your potential as a future scientist, right? So certainly your faculty mentors from this summer would have the knowledge of you and how you worked on the project and what you did that should give them the basis to make that kind of statement. If you have other letter writers who maybe you've just had, a professor you've had a class with or a couple of classes with, but haven't necessarily worked on research, I would highly recommend you share your research statement with them before they write their letter so that they have that sort of background to understand what it is you're trying to do. Okay. Again, you want to give your letter writers some time. The letters are actually due slightly after the rest of the application package. The letter writer will submit it directly to NSF. All you have to do is turn in their name and email and contact information, and then NSF will reach out to them and say, this person has said you were writing them a letter, here's how to submit it. But again, you need to do that enough time before the letters are due. So if you wait till the day the application is due before you talk to your letter writers, they won't have very much time to get that letter done. So make sure you have those conversations early. And again, the more information you can share with letter writers about what the program's about, just in case they're not familiar, most faculty will be familiar, but also then your own research statement and even maybe your personal statement are very helpful in that process. All right, almost done. So these deadlines, you will see, it's October this year. Okay, even earlier than normal. Good for me. But they haven't set the actual deadlines yet. They are bucketed deadlines based on the field that you are applying in. These will be available soon, hopefully. But they're usually November. So I would imagine they're going to be fairly late in October, but be prepared for early October since they haven't told us yet. Again, you can find in the at nsf.gov in the GRFP solicitation, which will have all that eligibility criteria. We'll also have these deadlines as soon as they're available. And it's 5 p.m. on that day. 5 p.m. wherever your mailing address is. So if your mailing address is in California, it's 5 p.m. California time. If your mailing address is in Charlotte, it's 5 p.m. Charlotte time. And they are serious about that. So put the due date on your calendar a couple of days ahead of time. You can't say it, right? And again, the letters will then be due usually a week or so after the deadline for each of the bucketed programs there. That says shortly after, it's usually a week. Now this again, so it does say late October, so that's good. Again, normally if you are applying as a undergraduate senior, this will all happen just before you do your graduate applications, right? If you're a level 1, if you're a level 2 or a level 3, meaning you're in your first or second year of graduate school, you'll already be in graduate school. You don't have to apply again, obviously. The fellowship offers usually come out late March, has on occasion been early April. So I guess they're hedging their bets here, but it's almost always in March, which is really helpful, and that they try very hard to get them to you, because if you're not aware yet, if you're applying to multiple graduate programs, you get admission offers at several places. The national sort of agreed upon deadline for you to make a decision is April 15th. Okay, so knowing whether or not you have a fellowship may help you make a decision about which program you want to go to. All right. If it means this program over here, that's my dream program, but I didn't get a very good funding office, you know, like they gave me a sad little assistantship for $20,000. But now I've got this fellowship, I can afford to go there, I can make it work, right? It also, if you're on a waiting list at a program and you then reach out to them and say, oh, I just got a graduate research fellowship, it almost always means they'll let you in. Okay, so one, because it's a very prestigious award, and two, because then they don't have to fund you, right? Which is often why programs waitlist students, is because they don't have enough funding for everybody. Okay, so very helpful that it comes in late March or early April. By sometime in May, again, after that April 15th deadline, you have to let them know that you're going to take the award and where you're going to graduate school. And then the fellowship year begins, it says early September, but it's really August, since most places on semesters start in August. Okay. All right. So again, I don't know why that, oh, that's a link. We've talked about that. I'll say this one again. Reference letters are mandatory before your application can be reviewed. You have to list at least 3 names up to 5. The NSF has to receive letters from at least 2 people for your application to move forward. But I will tell you, it can hurt your chances if you don't have at least 3 letters when it goes to review. So again, recommend, they say up to 5. I'd say at least 4. A 5th wouldn't hurt, to make sure that 3 letters are received. Okay. All right. The review criteria, and this is standard, my last slide. This is standard across all NSF programs. So these are the same criteria that are used if you apply for a $3 million NSF research grant later in your career, right? The same criteria are used. The first is intellectual merit. That is the goal of NSF. It's the goal of this program to push science forward, right? So does your work demonstrate the intellectual merit necessary to push science forward, right? And again, that comes primarily from that research statement. It helps if you really can talk about how you're making the work you are talking about would make a contribution. Again, nobody's ever going to come back and say, did you actually do that? This is a fellowship, not a grant. But that's where you demonstrate your potential intellectual merit. And then broader impacts. As I said, second equally important goal of the GRFP is to broaden participation in science. That is one aspect of broader impacts, is this person going to help us broaden participation in science, but it's also about how does the work this person is describing help society more broadly. Okay, so it can't be some tiny little thing you're going to do in a lab, and yes, it will move this science forward, unless you also tell why that's important, how that's going to help someone somewhere down the road. Okay. All right. Okay, I'm going to stop there. We've got, I think I've got 10 minutes for questions. Okay, we've got about 10 minutes for questions. I'll just leave that slide there. Yes. Yeah, so that's a good point. So intellectual merit is primarily going to come from the research statement. It's going to be about how well do you make the case that whatever this project is you're describing is going to advance our knowledge. Okay, that's intellectual merit. So sometimes, and depending on the field, sometimes that means it's connected to sort of a long history of research. Sometimes that means it's going to create a theoretical advance that will help us move the field in new ways. It can vary, but it's really in the research statement where you make the case that the work you are going to do as a future scientist is going to move the field forward. Broader impacts is going to come both from your personal statement and from the research statement. So benefits to society usually comes more from the research statement, but maybe a little bit of both. Broadening participation will come primarily from your research statement. Your personal statement. And so, but both are evaluated on both sets of criteria. So you want to touch on each of them. What I see a fair bit, and this is sort of insider tip, I guess, is as a reviewer, is it's really helpful if at least, especially in the research statement, but even some in the personal statement, if you have a specific section labeled intellectual merit and a section labeled broader impacts, and you kind of reiterate in 2 or 3 sentences in each of those sections the importance of the work you're doing. Yeah. And again, in 2 pages. The research statement is tough, yeah. If you're interested in applying this year, I would say start working on your research statements as soon as you finalize your posters. Yeah. Yeah, so engineering it's pretty broad. It's broader than you might think, because again, when the feds sort of divvy up research fields into different places they're putting funding, engineering does end up in NSF. So it's pretty broad, but it has to be so sort of like you can't do a clinical health. It can't be a completely practical project. It has to be connected to the larger intellectual effort of the field of engineering. So that one's not so much about the field as it is the degree program or the area of study. Yeah. And again, there's even more detail in the solicitation on the website. But yeah.
So if someone interested in that more directly medical related research, is there a similar program with NIH?
There is a graduate fellowship program at NIH as well. Yeah, yeah. And in fact, many of the processes and criteria are very similar to what NSF has. Yeah. Yes. So technically, no. Now at some institutions, they will say does. They will say if you are on this NSF fellowship, you are not eligible for an assistantship. That's an institutional level decision, though. That's not an NSF policy. It can, again, the NSF does not have a service requirement, but you know, it's a really great opportunity to take advantage of the fact that you don't have, 20 hours a week of your time taken up doing something else to really dig into your research. And it's only 3 years of funding. So what I generally recommend to folks is they think, sort of carefully about where the 3 years falls. Where do you take a break, or do you take a break to do something else to help prepare you? So if you're interested in a career, as a faculty member, it's very beneficial to do a teaching assistantship at some point, but exactly where that is, you kind of have to think about. It could overlap with the fellowship, but it often doesn't need to, and it's better for you usually if it doesn't. Yeah. Any other questions? Okay, like I said, I am super easy to find, lisa.walker@charlotte.edu. I'm pretty good with my email, although I'm not gonna look at Joseph right now. He's worked over me this summer and it's been a little slow. But I am happy to answer questions, review statements, anything like that would be helpful to you. I would recommend starting, maybe not next week, but in a couple of weeks, start while your sort of research experience is fresh in your mind, start drafting some of this stuff, because it is helpful to go over it multiple times to get people to look at it. And it's very helpful to have it more or less finished when you ask people to be reviewers. Okay. All right, I will turn it over to Andrew. Oh.
Walker. I'm Andrew Keener. I'm the Scholars Advisor in the Honors College, and I'm lucky today to be joined by
Good morning, I'm Dr. Lee. I'm the interim associate dean in the Honors College. And so I work closely with Dr. Keener and soon to be Dr. Boyd, who's an honors advisor. Dr. Keener is a scholars advisor, hence is leading us today on our journey through competitive fellowships.
right. So let's get this up and running. Let's see, I'll just change the display. All right. I think we want to continue the share, right?
Yeah, I think if we do.
Thank you so much. Um, okay, so actually, Dr. Lee, would you take the lead on this piece? We have a few questions for you all, just because it's always helpful to know who's in the room, who's with us.
Right. So you all are pretty good readers, but I'll read it for you anyway. Raise your hand if you're interested in public service, broadly understood. Got some halfway. The engineer, wait, you're an engineer, I'm glad you're thinking somewhat broadly. Raise your hand if you're considering grad school. I know everybody's hand should be up. Given the information that Dr. Walker just shared. Raise your hand if you've ever wanted to gain experience outside the US. Intellectual and cultural experience. Let's limit that because y'all might take it somewhere else. Yes, okay. Raise your hand if you're interested in conducting research.
All right, yeah, that ought to be everybody in here. So you know, we really wanted to come and tailor this message for the Summer Research Scholars Program based on the work that you all are engaged in this summer and let you know about some support that we can provide. Again, Dr. Leek and I are coming from the Honors College, Mr. Boyd, we're all coming from the Honors College, but we serve students beyond the Honors College when it comes to providing support for applicants to nationally competitive awards and scholarships, different opportunities, NSF, GRFP, just like Dr. Walker was talking about, we provide support across campus for those things.
And with Dr. Keener, he travels across the campus talking to students, right? But his office is in Levine Hall. So you want to reach him or meet with him, you may need to come over to Levine Hall. Now, that's not a short walk, but it's a walk everyone is capable of, and then you can get on the bus if you want. I see a big skateboard out there. Y'all are industrious. You can make it happen. My point is, don't let this resource go untapped just because he's on the other side of campus.
And I can also meet by Zoom. So for the engineers in the room, if you're on the other side of campus, and it takes 15 or 20 minutes reaching us from over there, I can also meet with you by Zoom. But we wanted to let you know about some of these opportunities, which are experience driven. So they're really about the kinds of experiences you can take in that will advance your career, advance your research interests, advance your goals. And there are many of them, too many more than we can talk about today. There are dozens and dozens of opportunities out there. You just heard about the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship, which is an amazing opportunity. If you're a rising senior, if you're in a science field, you should really seriously consider applying this year, really seriously. There are some others too. So a few of these here, I'm not going to get into a ton of detail, but I'll give you kind of a picture of what each of these are about. First of all, we have different opportunities that connect to study abroad opportunities or experiences that you can have beyond US borders. One of those is the Fulbright US Student Program. Show of hands if you've heard of this before. Yeah, I've seen some hands. And then also I saw a lot of you talking about how you were interested in some kind of experience abroad. So this program is a year-long program that you conduct after you graduate from college. It can be in any country or almost any country. There's some limitations, but lots of programs, a multitude of programs that fall into two different categories. There's one for study and research that ought to be of interest to a number of you in here, but also there is an English teaching assistantship position that you can also take on, again, in Colombia, in Japan, in Hungary. It really just depends on where you want to go, where your interests are. So this process is managed by Brad Sekulich in the Education Abroad office. I provide support for that process though. Typically, you'll want to get in touch with Mr. Sekulich over the summer if you're a rising senior. And August, there's a date by which he'll let you know we offer an interview for you to essentially strengthen your application. There are also 3 opportunities that are based in the British Isles, in the UK and in Ireland. And each of these are for postgraduate research and postgraduate degrees at a university of your choice in the UK or in Ireland. And these are the Mitchell Scholarship, which is the Ireland-based one, Marshall and Rhodes, which are UK-based. And Rhodes is specifically at Oxford University in the UK. And these are extremely competitive, but well worth applying to because you will emerge from this program with the opportunities, the resources that these projects or these degree programs make possible. You also learn a lot about yourself through the application process and strengthen your application to any graduate program. So if you're thinking about going to graduate school somewhere, maybe in the US, don't let that restrict you from applying to these opportunities as well. They're really door-opening opportunities, and you ought to know about them. And if you're a rising senior, you ought to seriously consider applying for them. And they have, you can get your degree in really any field imaginable. So these are not restricted to major at all. You've heard about the NSF Graduate Research Fellowship Program already, but I also want to highlight the Paul and Daisy Soros Fellowship for New Americans, which has an October deadline. And this is entirely a program for students who are either immigrants or who are children of immigrants who are interested in a graduate degree, and they fund up to $90,000 over 2 years of graduate research. So that's a mid-October deadline. Again, I'm your point person if you have questions about this. And Mr. Boyd, Mr. Jordan Boyd over here is your point person if you're interested in fellowships and awards associated with the Phi Kappa Phi Honor Society. Honor societies are something you all ought to be considering as well, not only for the sense of accomplishment that comes along with that, but also for the resources they have tied to them, which in some cases are competitive awards and fellowship. And Mr. Boyd, I don't know if you want to add anything real quick on that.
No, that was perfect, Dr. King.
Okay. Thanks. All right. So that said, you want to take this one, Dr. Lee?
Sure. Why should you apply? Because you're here. That's why. You've already expressed interest in spending your summer in this program and engaging in research, right? Of various kinds. So why not put yourself out there and apply for fellowships and jobs, graduate fellowships, things of that nature? It can be daunting, right? It's a very involved process, but it's well worth it, even if you don't get it. right? And the reason I say that is because you will rise to another level of understanding yourself and engaging with your mentors that will assist you down the line. So, like I've said to my own child, she just graduated from college, and Lord, she got a job. That's a good thing, y'all don't get that. But as a parent, when your child calls and says she's got a job, that's a good thing. One of the things I had to tell her was, you can't be afraid of hearing the word, no, thank you, or the phrase, no, thank you. If that's going to govern your behavior, you're never going to pursue things that could benefit you. Right? That's not Dr. Leak's rule, that's just a life rule. Right? If you don't put yourself out there, you can't expect to receive certain things. Right? So you're here, take advantage of this opportunity. There are lots of different awards for various opportunities and experiences, including grad school. And this is sort of related to what even Dr. Walker was talking about. Right now, in this summer experience, really do as much as you can to get to know the work of your faculty mentor or mentors, right? Give them a reason to remember you after the summer. You understand what I'm saying? All right. If we were in my class and this room were full, we got a good number of people, I'd say I'm less likely to remember you if you're sitting at the very back. Straight up. Unless you comment every day in class from the back, right? My point is, give them a reason to think about you when opportunities come to their, I was gonna say desk, but their computer screen, right? If you haven't done anything to indicate to them you're serious, you're motivated, you're passionate, well, why should I remember you? Right? No good reason. You've got support here on campus, us three, Dr. Walker, to guide you through the process. Staff, faculty, and research mentors. I had some of the best mentors one could ask for when I was in grad school, right? I got to know my mentors so well that 2 of them were in my wedding, right? I'm not saying they need to be in your wedding, right? But I am saying you gotta establish relationships with people who can assist you, right? And for you all, or for all students from 2019 to what? Now, in some ways, we were all impacted by the pandemic, and we haven't had maybe as much social interaction, right? You gotta get over that, all right? Do you have legitimate fears, some of you, about approaching senior faculty, asking them to participate on their research teams, things like that? You probably do, right? And that's legitimate, right? But you have to find a way to move beyond that fear, okay? It helps to develop skills for talking about yourself and your abilities, for sure, right? What's in here is, yes, very important, right? The knowledge that you have in science, engineering, and the humanities. And yes, humanities folks can do this kind of work as well. My PhD is in English and American Studies. But ultimately, can I guarantee this? Not really, but I'll say it anyway. You will inevitably get certain opportunities, not because of what you know, but because of who you know, and your ability to engage with people of various stripes and backgrounds in things that have maybe nothing to do with what you're studying. Right? Again, I had this conversation with my daughter. She was applying for jobs. I had the nerve to tell her to read some things, articles in magazines or newspapers that have nothing to do with her business major. Why would I do that, Dad? Because you don't know what executive you might meet who might be intrigued by the fact that you're reading about climate change and you're an accountant. You just never know. Right? So use yourselves and your wonderful personalities and dispositions. I'm assuming a lot there on that. Right? But I believe you can fly. Use you to advance you.
And to kind of double up on that point, Dr. Lee, your personal statement is going to be essential to so many of these competitive fellowship applications. And that's basically a chance for you to be authentic, for you to tell your story. That's what they want. A lot of students ask me, they say, Dr. Keener, what is it that they're looking for? They're looking for you, and they want to know who you are, why you're interested in the research that you do, why you got started in it in the first place, and where you see it going. And do you have what it takes to take it to the next level? So we wanted to highlight a few stories because this is all kind of abstract. So we wanted to provide some examples about students among you on our campus who have applied to things, different kinds of competitive awards, opportunities, and who are doing really exciting research in the broader world here on campus and beyond. So Jalen London, he's a nursing major and he's a Spanish minor. He is thinking about careers and research in the health sciences, particularly microbiology. And he applied to a dozen opportunities this past year. And the one he took was at Harvard University. So he's working right now, right this very moment on Harvard's campus in a microbiology lab. When he comes back, he's going to continue working with his research mentor on UNC Charlotte's campus. That's Dr. Kirill Afinin right there. Here's Jalen in the back with some of his lab mates. And he applied also not just to do research, but to present his research